My HR director called me sweetheart and laughed at my request for a raise, thinking she held all the cards. She didn't know I was the only one keeping their systems running. So, I quit, joined their biggest client, and returned as the auditor sent to destroy them. This is where the corporate ladder turned into a trapdoor for them, and you won't want to miss the fallout. Make sure you're subscribed to watch the bridge burn. We're curious. Have you ever been insulted by HR? Let us know in the comments. I was vibrating. That's the only way I can describe the physical sensation of my body sitting in the ergonomic chair that had arguably done more damage to my spine than good. It wasn't a vibration of excitement or even nervousness. It was the low-frequency hum of absolute cellular exhaustion. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night for the last 3 weeks, a sacrifice I had placed on the altar of this company to ensure that the quarterly migration didn't result in a catastrophic data loss. My eyes felt like they were packed with hot sand, and my hands, resting on my lap, were cold. Across the desk from me sat Denise, the director of human resources. The desk was a sprawling expanse of mahogany that probably cost more than my car, and between us lay a 14-page document. I had stapled it myself 5 minutes ago. The paper was still warm from the printer. So, Denise said, her voice carrying that practiced, airy lilt that HR professionals use when they are about to deliver bad news but want to frame it as a growth opportunity. She reached out and touched the corner of my document with a manicured fingernail, treating it like it might be infectious. You've asked for a salary adjustment. A market correction, I corrected her, my voice raspy. I cleared my throat and tried to sit up straighter, fighting the fatigue pulling at my shoulders. And a title change. As that document outlines, I am currently classified as junior support staff. Yet for the past 18 months, I have been performing the duties of a senior systems architect and lead integration specialist. I've successfully onboarded every major vendor, cleaned the entire legacy database, and personally patched the security vulnerabilities that would have cost us our ISO certification. I stopped. I had rehearsed this speech in the shower, in the car, and in the dark while staring at my ceiling at 3:00 a.m. I expected pushback. I expected negotiation. I expected her to open the folder, look at the metrics, look at the saved revenue, which totaled in the high 6 figures, and at least acknowledge the reality of the math. Denise didn't open the folder. She didn't even look at the summary page. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, a small, pitying smile playing on her lips. It was the kind of smile you give a toddler who has just presented you with a drawing of a horse that looks like a potato. Elena, she sighed, tilting her head to the side. That tilt. It was a precise, calculated movement designed to convey a mix of sympathy and superiority. I appreciate the enthusiasm. I really do. It's adorable how passionate you are about the computer things. My stomach dropped. The computer things? Denise, I rerouted 3 API pathways by hand last week to prevent a billing collapse. She waved a hand dismissively. We have a team for that, don't we? Brad leads that team. Brad forwarded me an email he was CC'd on yesterday asking me how to open a PDF, I said, my voice tightening. I am doing the work, Denise. I just want the compensation that matches the output. Denise let out a short, breathy laugh. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany, and looked me dead in the eyes. The warmth evaporated from her face, replaced by the steel of corporate gatekeeping. Sweetheart, she said. The word hit me like a physical slap. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Sweetheart, she repeated, savoring the diminutive. This is a corporate office, not Shark Tank. We don't negotiate with junior staff. We have pay bands for a reason. If we gave you a raise just because you worked a little late, we'd have to give everyone a raise. And that's just not how the real world works. She pushed the 14-page document back toward me without opening it. Now, was there anything else? I have a lunch order to coordinate. I looked at the document, I looked at her smile, and in that moment the exhaustion didn't leave, but it changed. It calcified. It hardened into something cold and heavy in the pit of my stomach. The betrayal was worse than the burnout. The burnout was just physical. This was a dismantling of my reality. I had thought merit mattered. I had thought results were currency. No, I said, my voice remarkably steady. Nothing else. I walked out of HR's office and into the hallway, moving like a ghost. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a sound that felt like it was drilling directly into my skull. My ear. Tea was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Thud, 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 sinking with the realization of what had just happened. Sweetheart. The word echoed in my head, bouncing off the beige walls. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't flip a table. I just walked, one foot in front of the other, clutching my rejected report to my chest like a shield. I passed the break room on my way back to my cubicle. The smell hit me instantly, burnt popcorn and stale coffee, the eternal perfume of corporate mediocrity. Inside, I could hear laughter. Loud, raucous laughter. I glanced in and saw 3 members of the integration team standing around the foosball table. They were debating the merits of different sandwich shops for lunch. These were the people Denise was being fair to. These were the people whose salaries I was effectively subsidizing with my unpaid overtime. I made it to my desk. It was tucked in a corner, buried behind a pillar, fitting for someone the company viewed as a utility rather than a person. My monitors were glowing with the amber text of a terminal window I had left running. A script I had written was currently crawling through the vendor database, automatically reconciling shipping manifest errors that, if left unchecked, would flag us for a federal audit within days. I sat down, I looked at the scrolling code. Hey, Alina. I flinched. Brad, my manager, rolled his chair out from his glass-walled office. He was holding his phone up, a grin plastered on his face that looked almost painful. Check this out, he said, oblivious to the fact that I looked like I had just walked away from a car crash. I'm thinking for the team morale booster next week, we do a Slack emoji wall. Like, we print out our favorite emojis and tape them to the glass. Fun, right? It really captures the synergy. I stared at him. This man made 3 times my salary. Last week, he had asked me if Java was the same thing as JavaScript because he wanted to sound smart in a client meeting. That sounds great, Brad, I said. My voice sounded hollow, distant. Awesome. Oh, hey, did you fix that ghost billing issue for Gen Access? James over there sent another email. He seemed kinda pissy. I'm handling it, I said. Cool, cool, you're a rock star. Keep crushing it, kiddo. He spun his chair around and rolled back into his office to presumably browse LinkedIn for leadership thought leadership quotes. I looked back at my screen. The script finished. A green line of text appeared, reconciliation complete, 4,200 errors fixed. I had saved the company roughly 20 grand in fines in the time it took Brad to propose an emoji wall. And Denise had called me sweetheart. A strange calmness settled over me. It was the calm of a soldier who realizes the general has left the tent and the map is lying open on the table. They thought I was just a cog. They thought I was a junior support staff who could be patted on the head and sent back to her corner. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't just a user of the system. I was the architect of the patches. I knew where the skeletons were buried because I was the one who had dug the graves to keep the bodies hidden. I knew that the secure client portal was held together by a single authentication script I wrote 6 months ago. I knew that the vendor compliance certificates were only passing because I manually updated the timestamps every month. I looked at the 14-page document sitting on my desk. I picked it up and slowly, deliberately, dropped it into the recycling bin. I didn't need to argue my value anymore. If they wanted to treat me like a piece of office furniture, they were about to find out what happens when the load-bearing beam decides to walk away. To understand why the sweetheart comment cut so deep, you have to understand what I gave up for this place. I didn't just work here, I kept this company on life support. 2 years ago, when I started, the department was a digital favela. The code base looked like someone had shoved spaghetti into a meat grinder and then asked an intern to tape it back together. I was hired to answer phones and reset passwords. That was the job description. But within 3 months, I realized that the glitches customers were complaining about weren't glitches, they were structural failures. I spent my first Thanksgiving as an employee in the server room. I told my family I was sick because I couldn't bear to explain that I was manually migrating a corrupted database so that our biggest client, a medical logistics firm called Gen Access, could ship insulin on Black Friday. I ate a vending machine turkey sandwich while watching a progress bar crawl across a screen. I spent my 27th birthday debugging a billing API that was bleeding $22,000 a month. I stayed until 4:00 a.m., found the rogue syntax, and patched it. The next morning, Brad high-fived the team and said, "Great quarter, guys," while I sat tea. Here with coffee jitters and a migraine. I did it because I care about the work. I take pride in systems that function. I have a pathological need to fix things that are broken. But Denise didn't see that. Denise saw a budget line item. Denise was the kind of HR director who framed compliance as culture. She was always perfectly put together, expensive blazers, hair that never moved, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She operated on a philosophy of weaponized fairness. If I got a raise, it wouldn't be fair to Kyle, who spent 6 hours a day trading crypto on his second monitor. She was the gatekeeper, and she enjoyed the power of the lock. And then there was Brad. If Denise was the malice, Brad was the negligence. He was a man who had failed upward with such velocity he had broken the sound barrier of incompetence. He was charming in a superficial way, the kind of guy who knew all the buzzwords but none of the meanings. He relied on me implicitly, effectively abdicating his entire job description to my inbox, but he never actually saw me. To him, I was just the magic box where he put problems and got solutions. The afternoon after the meeting with Denise, I sat in my cubicle and watched them. I watched Denise walk through the department, waving at Brad. I watched them laugh together near the coffee machine. "I think the team is really vibing right now," I heard Brad say. "Utilization is up." "That's good to hear," Denise replied, her voice carrying that sickening sweetness. "We just have to keep the overhead managed. Young staff can be so demanding these days." "Tell me about it," Brad chuckled. They were talking about me. They were standing 10 feet away, discussing my livelihood like it was a pest control problem. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. It wasn't anger anymore, it was clarity. I opened a new browser window. I didn't go to LinkedIn. Not yet. First, I went to our internal documentation server. I navigated to the folder labeled System Architecture and Critical Fail-Safes. The folder was empty. Of course it was, because I hadn't uploaded my personal documentation yet. I kept it on my local drive, planning to finalize it this week. It contained the instructions for the manual patches, the encryption keys for the legacy bridges, and the schedule for the compliance renewal bots I had built. Without that documentation, the system was a black box. I looked at the folder. I looked at Brad and Denise laughing. Delete. I dragged the local folder to the trash. Then I opened my email client. There was a message from James at Gen Access, the client Brad had mentioned. Subject: urgent discrepancy in vendor manifest body. Brad, we're seeing a lag in the portal again. Can you have your team look into this? We have an audit coming up and we can't afford hiccups. Brad hadn't replied. He was too busy planning the emoji wall. I stared at James's name. Gen Access was a massive company, serious people. They did real work. And for the last year, I had been the invisible hand fixing their problems while Brad took the credit. I wondered, did James know Brad didn't know how to code? Did James know that the team he was emailing was just a 28-year-old woman eating instant noodles and being called sweetheart? I clicked forward. I didn't hit send on the forward immediately. My cursor hovered over the button, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Forwarding that email to James wasn't just a breach of protocol, it was a declaration of war. It was bypassing the chain of command, ignoring the client communication strategy that Brad had implemented, which consisted entirely of him buying lunch for executives, and inserting myself into a conversation I was supposedly too junior to handle. I changed the recipient. I didn't forward it to Brad. I hit reply all, removed Brad and Denise from the CC line, and typed directly to James. James, I see the latency issue you're flagging. It's stemming from a deadlock in the legacy SQL queries during the high-volume intake. The automated tools aren't catching it because the error logs are being suppressed by the current admin settings. I can manually flush the cache and patch the query logic, but we need to discuss a long-term fix for the architecture before the audit. Alina. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It wasn't my desk phone, it was my personal cell. The number was local but unlisted. This is Alina. Alina, this is James from Gen Access. I'm looking at your email. His voice was deep, calm, and stripped of the corporate fluff I was used to hearing from Brad. You're saying the error logs are being suppressed. Yes, I said, dropping my voice and glancing over the partition to make sure Brad was still distracted by his emoji wall project. The previous update, the one pushed 3 months ago, set the error reporting threshold too high. The system thinks it's health. Why? But it's silently timing out on 4% of your transactions. There was a long silence on the other end. 4%, James repeated. That matches our internal loss models almost exactly. We've been asking your team about this for weeks. Brad told us it was a localized ISP issue. It's not the ISP, I said firmly. Are you free for lunch? James asked. Today. I looked at my calendar. I had a team synergy stand-up at 1:00 p.m. I have a dental appointment, I lied smoothly. I can meet you at noon. I walked out of the office with my laptop bag over my shoulder. I felt like a spy carrying state secrets, but all I was carrying was competence. The Gen Access headquarters was only 3 blocks away, but it felt like a different solar system. The lobby was all glass and polished concrete, smelling of fresh espresso and money. There were no peeling posters about teamwork. Just quiet, efficient professionals moving with purpose. James met me in a conference room that overlooked the city. He didn't offer me a generic water bottle, he had a barista-made latte waiting. He didn't waste time with small talk. We're worried, Alina, he said, leaning forward. We have a federal compliance audit coming up in 2 months. If our vendor portal, the one your company manages, fails that audit, we get fined. Heavily. And based on what you just told me about the error logs, we are not going to pass. You won't, I confirmed. I opened my personal laptop, not the work one, and pulled up a sanitized diagram I'd drawn the night before. Your architecture is being held together by duct tape. I've been manually patching the holes every night, but without a structural overhaul, the load from the audit testing will crash the system. James looked at the diagram. He looked at me. You've been doing this manually. For 18 months. Brad takes credit for the uptime reports, James noted, his eyes narrowing. Brad doesn't know the difference between Java and JavaScript, I said, taking a sip of the coffee. It was excellent. He thinks the cloud is a literal cloud. James leaned back, tapping a pen against the table. We've been discussing terminating the contract with your firm. The only reason we haven't is the fear of the transition chaos. We didn't know who actually understood the system. We thought it was a team effort. It is a team effort, I said dryly. The team breaks it and I fix it. James smiled. It was a real smile, sharp and appreciative. Alina, we don't want to hire a consultant to tell us what's wrong. We know what's wrong. We need a cleaner. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried. He slid a folder across the table. It wasn't just a job offer. We're initiating a pre-audit review of your company's performance starting next week, James said. Our contract gives us the right to inspect all vendor systems. We need a lead systems auditor to run that inspection. Someone who knows exactly where to look to prove breach of contract. I looked at the title on the offer letter, Director of Systems Integrity. The salary was nearly double what I was making. "You want me to audit my own employer?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I want you to audit the vendor that has been failing us," James corrected. "If that happens to be the people who treat you like a secretary while you do the work of a CTO, well, that's just karma, isn't it?" I picked up the pen. "I'll need full autonomy." "You'll have it," James promised. "And you start Monday, but Alina, when you walk back in there, don't be gentle." I signed my name. The ink looked like vengeance. The next 3 days were a blur of surreptitious data gathering. I was living a double life. By day, I was the quiet, junior support staff, nodding politely, while Brad explained to me why the font size on the weekly report was the most critical issue facing the company. By night, I was constructing the most lethal audit trail in corporate history. I went through the server logs. I downloaded the chat histories where I had explicitly warned Brad about security flaws, only for him to reply with a thumbs-up emoji. I archived the ticket threads where Denise had denied training requests for the team, citing budget constraints, while simultaneously approving a $15,000 retreat for the executive leadership team. I wasn't stealing proprietary code. I was gathering evidence of negligence. There is a difference, and I knew exactly where the legal line was. I danced right up to it, waltzed along the edge, and took screenshots of the view. On Thursday morning, I walked into Brad's office. He was trying to balance a Newton's cradle on his nose. "Hey, rockstar," he said, the balls clacking onto his desk as he sat up. "What's up? Did we fix that latency thing?" "It's handled," I said. "Brad, I'm resigning." He blinked. "Resigning like, for the day, you feeling sick?" "No, Brad, I'm resigning from the company. My last day is tomorrow." He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "Whoa, hold on. You can't just leave. We have the quarterly review coming up. You're the only one who knows how to run the macro." "The integration script," I said. "And I'm sure the team can handle it. You said yourself we have a great synergy right now." Brad laughed nervously. He stood up and walked around the desk, trying to use his physical height to intimidate me, but he just looked like a frantic golden retriever. "Alina, look, I know you were bummed about the raise thing, but you have to understand you're still young. You need to pay your dues. Leaving now, it's going to look terrible on your resume. It's job hopping. Employers hate that." "I think I'll be fine," I said. "Where are you going?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "Is it tech? You know we have a non-compete, right?" "The non-compete only applies to competitors," I said. "I'm not going to a competitor." "Technically true, clients aren't competitors." "Well," Brad huffed, crossing his arms. "Good luck, you'll be back. They always come back. The grass isn't greener, Alina. It's just expensive AstroTurf." I walked out and went straight to HR. Denise was there, eating a salad that cost more than my hourly wage. "I'm resigning," I told her, handing over the letter. She took it with 2 fingers, scanned it, and let out a sigh that sounded like a deflating tire. "Oh, Alina, that's disappointing. We had such high hopes for you. Eventually." "I'm sure you did." "I hope you didn't take our little chat the other day too personally," she said, flashing that tight, fake smile. "The business world can be tough. I was just trying to toughen you up, give you a little grit." "You gave me plenty of grit, Denise," I said. "More than you know." "Well, please make sure you document everything before you go," she said, waving a fork at me. "We don't want the next person to be lost." I smiled. It was the first time I had genuinely smiled in that office in months. "Don't worry, I'm leaving everything exactly as I found it." I went back to my desk. I opened the transition folder on the shared drive. I deleted my personal cheat sheets. I deleted the how-to guides I had written for the interns. I deleted the automated scripts that ran on my local machine to fix the database errors every morning at 4:00 a.m. I reverted the system to its natural state. I wasn't sabotaging the code. I was simply removing the unauthorized, custom-built crutches that had been holding this crippled infrastructure upright. Without my junior interventions, the system was exactly what they had paid for: broken. I packed my box, a mug, a picture of my dog, and my mechanical keyboard. As I walked to the elevator on Friday afternoon, nobody looked up. No cake, no card, just the hum of the servers and the sound of Brad laughing in his office. "Goodbye, sweetheart," I thought as the elevator doors closed. "I'll see you Monday." The weekend felt like the deep breath before a plunge. I spent it with James and the legal team at Gen Access, finalizing the audit scope. When they handed me my badge, a sleek, heavy plastic card with lead auditor printed below my name, I felt a physical shift in my center of gravity. I wasn't the girl begging for a market adjustment anymore. I was the market correction. Monday morning, 8:45 a.m. I walked into the lobby of my old building. The security guard, Ralph, looked up from his monitor. He knew me as the girl who always forgot her badge because I was rushing in late after working from home until 2 a.m. "Morning, Alina," he grunted. "Forgot your badge again." "No, Ralph," I said, handing him my driver's license and the Gen Access authorization letter. "I'm a visitor today, external auditor." Ralph squinted at the paper, then at me. He looked at my suit, a tailored navy blazer that I had bought with my signing bonus, and whistled low. "Moving up in the world, huh? Go on up. They're expecting the client in the main conference room." The elevator ride was silent. I watched the numbers tick up, 1, 2, 3. The doors opened on the 4th floor. The air smelled the same toner and anxiety, but the perspective was different. I walked past my old cubicle. It was empty, dark, but the chaos around it was already starting. "Why is the login looping?" I heard Kyle shouting from the integration pit. "It's asking for a token. Alina usually handles the token refresh." "She's not here," someone else yelled. "Check the documentation." "There is no documentation." I kept walking. I walked past Brad's office. He was on the phone, looking sweaty. "No, I don't know why the dashboard is blank, sir. It was working Friday. It must be a cloud latency thing." I reached the main glass conference room. Denise was there, arranging water bottles. Greg, the VP of operations, was pacing. They were expecting the Gen Access team. They were expecting a group of strangers they could bullshit with buzzwa. Ords and expensive lunches. I pushed the door open. Denise turned, her customer service smile plastered on her face. "Hello, welcome to." Her voice died in her throat. Her eyes went to my face, then down to the visitor badge clipped to my lapel. "Alina," she whispered. "Good morning, Denise," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. I walked to the head of the table, the seat usually reserved for Greg, and set my leather portfolio down with a heavy thud. Greg stopped pacing. He stared at me, blinking rapidly. "Alina, what are you doing? You don't work here anymore. You can't just walk in here." "Actually, Greg, I can," I said. I opened the portfolio and slid the formal notice across the mahogany table. "Per Clause 9.3 of your Master Service Agreement with Gen Access, the client reserves the right to conduct immediate, on-site inspections of all vendor systems to ensure compliance. I am the Director of Systems Integrity for Gen Access. I am leading this audit." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the break room down the hall. "You," Denise stammered, "you're the auditor." "I am," I said, "and we have a lot to get through. Please take a seat." Greg sat down. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. "This is highly irregular." "What's irregular, Greg, is the state of your data security," I said, plugging my laptop into the projector. "Let's start with the shared credentials list." I brought up the first slide. It was a screenshot of an Excel spreadsheet named Master Passwords Do Not Share Final V2, XLSX. "This file," I said, pointing to the screen, was hosted on a public-facing SharePoint folder. It contains the admin root passwords for the Gen Access shipping portal. It has been accessed by 3 former employees in the last month. Do you know who secured this file?" Denise swallowed hard. We have strict policies about that. You have policies, I countered. You don't have enforcement. I know, because for the last year, I was the one manually deleting this file every time Brad re-uploaded it so he wouldn't have to remember his password. Brad, who had just walked in the door expecting a free bagel, froze in the doorway. He saw me at the head of the table. He saw the spreadsheet on the screen. His face drained of color. We are freezing all payments to your firm effective immediately, I announced, looking directly at Denise. Until this audit is complete and every single vulnerability I identify is remediated. And Denise. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. I'm going to need to see the salary bands for the entire support team, I said, to cross-reference with the billing hours you've been charging Gen Access for senior architect work. I have a suspicion there's a discrepancy. Denise shrank in her chair. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted. The sweetheart was holding the gavel and court was in session. The audit didn't take weeks. It took 3 days to dismantle the illusion of competence they had built. By Wednesday, the conference room had become a war room, but it was a massacre, not a battle. I wasn't just finding errors, I was narrating the history of their negligence. Every time Greg or Brad tried to offer an excuse, that was a legacy issue. Or, we were waiting on a vendor patch. I would pull up an email from my own archive where I had explicitly offered the solution they had ignored. On February 14th, I said, projecting an email thread onto the screen, I sent a request to purchase a $500 SSL certificate renewal. Denise, you denied it, citing a freeze on non-essential assets. 2 days later, you approved a $2,000 espresso machine for the break room. Denise looked at the table. The team morale was low. The team morale was low because the servers were crashing, I said coldly. And speaking of the team, I signaled to James, who was joining via video link from the Gen Access HQ. His face filled the main screen, looming over the room like a disappointed deity. We've reviewed the findings, James said, his voice booming through the speakers. The level of operational negligence here is frankly staggering. You've been billing us for senior-level support while relying on unpaid overtime from junior staff to manually patch critical infrastructure. That is fraud. Greg wiped sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. James, look, we can fix this. We can restructure. We can put Brad on a performance plan. Brad isn't the problem, I cut in. Brad is a symptom. The problem is that you view technical competence as a commodity you can underpay and ignore. You built a house of cards and fired the only person holding the glue. We didn't fire you, Brad blurted out, finding a sudden burst of desperate courage. You quit, you walked out on us. I walked out, I agreed, and now I'm back to finish the job. I turned to the final slide. It was a termination notice. Gen Access is exercising the material breach clause, I said. We are terminating the contract, effective immediately. We will be migrating all data to an internal team by end of week. You can't do that, Greg shouted, standing up. That contract is 40% of our revenue. You'll bankrupt us. Then you should have listened to the girl who told you the API was broken, I said, closing my laptop. Instead of calling her sweetheart. The silence that followed was heavy, final. Denise looked at me, her eyes wet. Elena, please, people will lose their jobs. No, Denise, I said, standing up and smoothing my blazer. Competent people won't lose their jobs. In fact, I've already hired 3 of them. I looked out the glass wall of the conference room. Kyle, the integration lead, and 2 of the support staff were packing their boxes. They caught my eye. Kyle gave me a thumbs up. I offered jobs to the team members who actually did the work, I told the room. They start at Gen Access on Monday, with a 30% raise and full benefits. Brad looked out the window, watching his department disintegrate. You poached my team. I rescued them, I corrected, from you. The fallout was swift and brutal. With 40% of their revenue gone overnight, the company went into a tailspin. The board of directors launched an internal investigation. Greg was fired within a week. Brad was restructured, out of a job a month later. Last I heard, he was trying to sell NFTs on Twitter. And Denise. Denise was the one who had to process the exit paperwork for the mass exodus of staff I took with me. I remember my final moment with her. I was in the lobby, waiting for Kyle and the others to bring their boxes down. Denise came out of the elevator. She looked tired. Her hair wasn't as perfect as usual. She was holding a clipboard. "You really burned it all down, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "I didn't light the match, Denise," I said. "I just stopped putting out the fire." She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. Not as a junior staffer, not as a budget line item, but as a force of nature she had severely miscalculated. "I suppose I should have looked at that 14-page document," she admitted, a bitter smile touching her lips. "It was a good document," I said. "It would have saved you millions." Kyle walked out of the elevator, holding a box of cables and smiling like he'd just won the lottery. "Ready, boss?" he asked me. "Boss." I smiled. "Ready." We walked out of the building into the sunlight. The air smelled fresh, clean, no burnt popcorn, no stale coffee, just the crisp, electric scent of a future that belonged entirely to me. I checked my phone. A notification from my bank app popped up. My first full paycheck from Gen Access had just hit. The number was beautiful. I texted James, "Migration complete. Team is on board, we're live." He replied instantly, "Good work, director. Coffee's on me tomorrow." I put my phone in my pocket and didn't look back at the glass building behind me. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening inside: the panic, the silence, the slow crumbling of a kingdom built on arrogance. They had wanted a sweetheart. They got a CEO.